Attention! What Ferrari is doing in 2025 could change everything. After a shaky start, will this be the return of the prancing horse to the Formula One throne? Today I'll tell you the truth behind the SF-25, the bomb in Jeddah, and how Leclerc and Hamilton can turn the championship around. From the moment Ferrari unveiled the SF-25, it was clear that this was a car with a completely different approach than its predecessor. But this radical move brought with it a series of immediate consequences that shook the entire Maranello structure. The first major problem was the car's extreme sensitivity. The SF-25 was born with an incredibly narrow operating window. This means the car only performs properly under very specific conditions. In practice and the first races of the year, the data made it clear that the car suffered significant performance losses in medium-speed corners, precisely where it was supposed to gain time. Instead of advancing relative to the SF-24, it was losing up to 0.4 seconds. And this wasn't a minor problem. It was as if the car was running with an invisible penalty, a hidden disadvantage that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, but that profoundly affected performance. Most alarming was that even the new pull rod front suspension system, a bold and risky design decision, failed to stabilize this erratic behavior. Weight distribution, mechanical balance, and the interaction between the ground and aerodynamics generated constant inconsistencies. Ferrari had created a car that, in theory, should have been superior, but which in practice proved unpredictable. The situation began to change in Bahrain. At that race, Ferrari introduced its first major update package of the season. The approach was clear. Attack the problem from the base of the car, where downforce is actually generated in this era of ground effect cars. The team led by Diego Tondi developed a new floor design, completely redesigned from the diffuser to the sidewalls. The new floor had a dual function: to increase the level of available load and above all to expand that very limited operating window. Data analysis after the race revealed a resounding advance. The window had doubled compared to Suzuka. The car began to behave more predictably, more consistently. The change was evident even with full fuel tanks, a situation where Ferrari traditionally struggled. In the middle stint of the race in Bahrain, with more than 65% of the fuel load still in the car, lap times were highly competitive. It wasn't just a momentary boost. This new floor not only modified the car's aerodynamics but also changed the center of pressure, the way the car distributes the load between the front and rear axles. These small adjustments, almost invisible to the human eye, transformed the overall behavior of the SF-25. Key parts of the diffuser and aerodynamic barriers were also redesigned, allowing them not only to generate more downforce, but also to do so in a more stable manner. In other words, Ferrari stopped fighting its own car to focus on fighting its rivals. The most valuable thing about these updates wasn't simply that the car was faster. It was that they could finally predict its behavior. That's the difference between a midfield car and a real title contender. Uncertainty became control. Chaos became strategy. However, challenges remain. Ferrari still needs to fine-tune the balance between mechanical and aerodynamic components. The new floor was a step in the right direction, but it's not enough to maintain the pace of Red Bull or McLaren for an entire season. The good news for Ferrari is that for the first time in a long time, there are clear signs of progress. And with a still long calendar ahead, what started as a serious problem could become the Italian team's biggest competitive advantage in years. When Formula One arrived in Jeddah in 2025, Ferrari knew it. This was its big opportunity. The world's fastest street circuit could, paradoxically, be the place where the SF-25 could finally breathe freely. After the progress made in Bahrain with the new aerodynamic package, everything pointed to the Saudi Arabian track offering ideal conditions to fully exploit the potential of the Italian single-seater. The Jeddah track is atypical. It's not just its fast layout that makes it special. It's a layout of fast, interlocking corners with minimal abrasion on the asphalt and an extremely flat profile, with hardly any bumps. All of this represents a perfect combination for a car that needs to operate at an extremely low height to generate maximum ground effect. And that's precisely the SF-25's comfort zone. Ferrari adjusted its setup to run as low to the ground as possible, reducing the chassis height to the minimum allowed. Unlike circuits like Suzuka or even Sakir itself, where bumps force the car to be raised and compromised aerodynamic efficiency, Jeddah allows for an aggressive setup focused on pure performance. Fewer bumps mean less interference with aerodynamic stability. Less tire wear means a longer window to exploit soft compounds. And less drag means more straight-line speed, something the SF-25 had already proven to master. But it wasn't just a matter of external conditions. Internally, Ferrari had also fine-tuned its simulation for this Grand Prix. In the weeks leading up to the race, the simulator team worked tirelessly to find the best possible suspension setup, especially in terms of traction. One of the car's major weaknesses in the early races was exiting slow corners, where the rear axle easily lost grip. In Jeddah, thanks to the new surface and simulator testing, Ferrari was able to minimize this loss of traction. The SF-25's dynamic settings were perfectly suited to the Saudi Arabian track, allowing for a more direct response and superior stability during rapid changes of direction. The data prior to the weekend was promising. In theory, the car's operating window could be increased by 30% compared to the already improved version seen in Bahrain. This not only expanded the scope for competing with more aggressive strategies, but also allowed the drivers Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton to drive with greater confidence, without the constant fear of straying from the ideal operating range. This level of predictability and performance is something Ferrari hasn't had for some time. What at other tracks meant uncertainty and adaptation, in Jeddah became precision. Here, there was no need to improvise or take risks with compromised setups. Everything was where it should be. The car, the setup, the tires, even the ambient temperature worked in favor of the Italian team. Furthermore, Jeddah represents more than just a favorable circuit. It's a validation. If the SF-25 works here, on a high-speed street track with long corners and constant lean, it means that the concept behind the car, however revolutionary it may be, has a solid foundation. That the direction taken in Maranello, with its risks and profound changes, is beginning to bear concrete fruit. And there's another key aspect, the SF-25's DNA. This car wasn't designed to compete solely in ideal conditions. It was designed to dominate on high-speed tracks, where fast corners allow it to take advantage of the downforce generated from the ground. Jeddah is the perfect example of that type of circuit. So, if the car shown here, the message to Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes was clear. Ferrari is back, and it's coming with a machine that can win. The Saudi Arabian race thus became a crucial test. More than points, what was at stake was the validation of all the technical work done since pre-season. If the SF-25 managed to perform as expected, then it would no longer be a promise but a real threat. A warning to the rest of the grid that Ferrari had not only understood its problems, but was already beginning to solve them. A team's true intentions aren't always understood by observing the car on track. Sometimes the clearest message comes from within, from the corridors of Maranello, from the microphones that capture the words of those who have lived the project since its inception. And this year, Ferrari has spoken with more conviction than in a long time. Fred Vasseur, the team principal, didn't mince his words. For him, last season was just the prelude to something much more ambitious. Ferrari went to the final corner of 2024 fighting for the Constructors' Championship, and that was no coincidence. It was the result of having finally understood how a Formula One season should be run from the technical, strategic, and human perspectives. But in 2025, the goal isn't to fight, it's to win. And win everything. Vasseur made it very clear that there is no room for complacency. Ferrari won't settle for second-best status. They didn't build the SF-25 for that. His message was direct. This year we're going for both titles. We've changed what needed to be changed, and now it's time to reap the results. And when he says, we've changed what needed to be changed, he's not just referring to the car. He's also referring to the team, to the work culture, to the way data is analyzed, strategies are executed, and updates are prepared. Everything surrounding the SF-25 has been rethought from the ground up. One of the key names in this structural redesign is Loic Serra, the new chassis technical director. Under his leadership, Ferrari has modified 99% of the car compared to the previous year. But these aren't random changes. There's a philosophy behind it. Serra explained that the SF-25 isn't a break with the past, but rather a radical evolution of the SF-24, based on what worked and transformed based on what didn't. One of the riskiest decisions was introducing the pull rod front suspension in the final year of the current regulations. Something few teams dare to do. Why change something so complex in a year when other teams are already thinking about 2026? Serra's response was forceful, because this was the time to do it. Because every thousandth of a second matters. And because if Ferrari wants to become the dominant team again, it must start innovating fearlessly. You don't win by being conservative. But a team doesn't live by engineers alone. It also needs drivers who believe in the project. And in that regard, Ferrari seems to have found a duo that combines youth, a hunger for victory, and the experience that has seen it all. Charles Leclerc is the epitome of absolute commitment to the team. He publicly declared that his goal is not just to win races, but to be crowned world champion. But beyond his personal desire, he made it clear that the collective objective is the Constructors' Championship, and that he is physically and mentally prepared like never before. Leclerc also highlighted something fundamental. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton has given the team a new dimension, a different internal dynamic, a renewed energy. The two have begun to work closely together, analyzing data, sharing simulations, and refining strategies. What Ferrari has built is not just a fast car, but a solid foundation. And then there's Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, who this year switched from Mercedes to Ferrari in one of the most symbolic moves in recent F1 history. His first statements were more than just pleasantries. He spoke of passion, of professionalism, of a motivation he hadn't felt in years. But above all, he spoke of pride. Pride in wearing red. Pride in representing the most iconic Scuderia in motorsport. And he left a phrase that sums up the general feeling: we couldn't be more hungry or more determined to succeed. These voices aren't just statements for the press. They reflect an internal transformation of a Ferrari that no longer hides behind excuses, that has learned from its mistakes, and that now, finally, is beginning to believe itself capable of returning to the top. Because when leaders speak firmly, results usually follow close behind. Behind the optimism, the technical advances, and the words of confidence coming from Maranello, there is a reality that Ferrari cannot ignore. The SF-25 is a complex car. A car that, although it has shown clear progress, remains fragile in several critical aspects. And that, in modern Formula One, can be the difference between dreaming of a championship or resigning itself to being a supporting player. The SF-25's main challenge remains its operating window. Even with the improvements implemented in Bahrain, the car requires specific conditions to perform at its peak. Any deviation in temperature, tire pressure, load level, or chassis height can take the car out of that optimal range and undermine its performance. This fragility in setup forces Ferrari to work within very narrow margins and walk a fine line between excellence and mediocrity. One of the most obvious examples of this vulnerability was Lewis Hamilton's experience at the Chinese Grand Prix. In that race, the car was disqualified due to excessive wear on the plank, the sliding block located on the underbody of the car. This type of disqualification not only puts valuable points at risk but also reveals a structural problem. To maximize the SF-25's performance, Ferrari needs to run as low as possible. But doing so would conflict with FIA technical regulations. So, how can performance be balanced without crossing the line? This tension between the need for performance and technical limitations represents one of the biggest dilemmas for Ferrari's engineers. On circuits where the surface isn't perfectly smooth, they are forced to lift the car more than desired. This compromises ground effect, reduces downforce, and consequently reduces the car's competitiveness. Another critical aspect is aerodynamic map management. Although the new floor has helped stabilize the SF-25's downforce, it still lacks the efficiency and versatility demonstrated by rivals such as McLaren or Red Bull. These teams have managed to develop cars that not only generate more downforce, but do so consistently in a variety of conditions. The Ferrari, on the other hand, remains reactive. It improves when everything is perfect, but falls apart with any small alteration. The problem is compounded when the compromises required in the car's setup are observed. To address one weakness, such as traction in slow corners, Ferrari often ends up sacrificing performance elsewhere, such as stability in fast corners or efficiency on straights. These types of internal trade-offs reflect that the SF-25's balance has not yet been fully resolved. And as long as that balance remains unsettled, Ferrari will continue to race against time to find solutions between races. Furthermore, there's added pressure. Unlike teams that can afford a transition year, Ferrari doesn't have that luxury. With the arrival of Lewis Hamilton and the technical renewal, expectations have immediately risen. The press, fans, sponsors, and even the team members themselves understand that 2025 can't be just another year. It must be the year in which the changes materialize. The year in which Ferrari goes from promise to reality. This context means that every technical decision, every configuration change, and every update carries a specific weight. It's no longer just about developing a competitive car, but about making it fast. Because in today's Formula One, those who don't constantly evolve are left behind. And those who can't adapt disappear from the title fight in a matter of weeks. Therefore, although the SF-25 has taken firm steps forward, the real challenge still lies ahead. Ferrari must prove it can maintain this level of evolution throughout the season. That it can adapt to different layouts, temperatures, driving styles, and race conditions. Only then can it be considered a legitimate contender. The question is not minor. Is Ferrari really back? Are we witnessing the definitive rebirth of Formula One's most iconic team? Or, on the contrary, is all this simply a fleeting illusion generated by a couple of favorable circuits and circumstantial improvements? The truth is that 2025 could mark a turning point. What we have seen so far is a clear sign that Ferrari has found a direction. The SF-25 is not perfect, but it is competitive. And that after years of technical inconsistencies, strategic errors, and accumulated frustrations, already represents a significant change. For the first time in a long time, there is a solid foundation on which to build. The evolution between Suzuka and Bahrain was tangible. It wasn't a minimal improvement. It was a real, measured transformation proven on track. An almost total expansion of the operating window. A coherent technical response to the car's structural problems. And more importantly, a demonstration that Ferrari knows how to diagnose its weaknesses and respond with effective solutions. That hadn't happened for a long time. Then came Jeddah. An unforgiving circuit. A layout that doesn't give away performance. And there too Ferrari responded. With an aggressive setup, with an aerodynamic floor that finally worked in harmony with the mechanics. And with drivers who got the most out of the car without fighting it. That's the difference between a team that reacts and one that competes. Ferrari is no longer just reacting. It's fighting. But for this comeback to be more than just a good run, the team needs to demonstrate consistency. Ferrari's true comeback won't be measured only in podiums. It will be measured in how they manage the next updates. In how they respond when the car doesn't fit the circuits they follow. How they adapt their philosophy when obstacles arise. Because returning to the top isn't a weekend affair. It's a long-distance battle. A race against time. Against rivals who won't wait. Red Bull remains the standard. McLaren has demonstrated a brutal ability to adapt. Mercedes, even with doubts, is always a dangerous team. And Ferrari, if it wants to compete with them, needs more than speed. It needs reliability. It needs firm decisions. It needs technical courage, but also strategic vision. And above all, it needs to execute without any margin for error. Because in this championship, half a second of indecision can cost everything. So, is Ferrari back? The answer for now is partial. Ferrari has returned to the level of conversation. It has returned to the analysis, to the headlines, to the predictions. But it has not yet returned to where it truly belongs. Absolute dominance, the fight for titles, the consistency that turns a good car into a champion. That return is still under construction. But for the first time in years, it doesn't seem impossible. If the SF-25 confirms its potential in the upcoming races, if the updates expected in Miami work as projected, and if Leclerc and Hamilton continue to push the team from within, then yes. Then the answer will be different. Not only will Ferrari be back, it will be back to stay.